Hi, McCay. First and foremost, I want to just thank you for such like an encouraging post. You raised a lot of good things throughout the discussion, but kind of your first sentence there about identifying love but shying away from embracing the image of long suffering is a really significant part of kind of just my overall philosophy. And it definitely relates to law enforcement and that profession because, these individuals that sign up for that career, whether they're in Baltimore, as you spoke about your work in that community, or anywhere else in the country, they're knowingly going into a profession where they're going to encounter suffering, and they know that. And it's kind of, it's significant even on a weekend like this weekend where we have Veterans Day that's coming up on Monday. And, law enforcement, many of the individuals in that profession, as you highlighted, are, former military or come from a military background. There's an inherent military structure in that realm. And so I thought that was significant, that you brought that up at the very beginning. You spoke about how discomfort, can build character, and that folks that are in the uniform may be weary of what we bring to the table, and talked about the healing that just has to take place within the kind of the law enforcement community. It's been a unique time, right? Over the last several years, there's been a lot of different movements that have gotten a lot of debate nationally, and what impact that has had on law enforcement. There's always kind of the mistrust, like we love police until we need the police kind of thing. There's obviously issues, themes in our country, racial profiling, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of these kinds of things have brought up relevant topics that do require some discussion, right? We need some dialogue around these areas because some of these things we know do happen and are prevalent in law enforcement. Racial profiling, for example, is a clear one, right? The research is clear that that's a systemic problem in policing. Whether people agree with that or disagree with it, there's been numerous studies that have shown that that's an issue. But as we talk about prolonged exposure therapy and working with law enforcement, I think that, as you discussed, how we can talk to these individuals about how prolonged suffering, that they're used to, kind of carries over into the clinical setting, and that this is not going to be an forever kind of feeling. Like this therapy doesn't go on forever. It's a set time, but it's going to be very similar to stepping into something that they know is going to carry with it some pain, and through that pain they're going to come to a resolution on how to kind of define these past traumas that they've experienced and how they are going to cope with those experiences moving forward, putting a new definition on those. And a lot of this has to do with the fear factor. These individuals that are in law enforcement, and it's kind of funny because this discussion board has kind of taken on a real underlying theme of law enforcement and the use of prolonged exposure therapy. But that was kind of what I talked about in my initial post, was using it with law enforcement. But these are folks that are willing to step into fearful situations, and sometimes have responses to those fear moments that are not necessarily normal. That the normal person, that they stood into these moments, of an armed robbery or some type of disaster response, that they're having to go out and do some of this really dangerous work and really stressful work. The fear responses in those individuals as public safety professionals are going to be different. And so I think that's why prolonged exposure therapy could really be of tremendous value to folks in this field and into this profession, because not only are they dealing with real traumas frequently, but they're also having to encounter fear, and they probably have some responses to fear that are erroneous, right? That they have to kind of understand that, this isn't the normal thing, right? Most normal people don't go running into a burning building. A firefighter, it's a perfectly good structure and it's on fire. The normal person runs away, right? But a firefighter, gets suited up and goes into the fire. And so kind of having discussions around that and putting that in context and the reality of that, I think, is really, really important. So your community in Baltimore has just gone through a ton of this, because I'm familiar with that department. I've seen some of the national headlines. There's serious race relation issues that are going on in that city. And then not only with some of your department had some corruption. And so there's been all of these things that have gone on. And so it would be fascinating to see how using prolonged exposure therapy with officers, say at Baltimore PD, would be, and how effective that would work for them. And so there's not a ton of people that I meet and come across that have this desire to work with this subgroup of the population, but it's something where I'm kind of drawn to. It's, the VA is there for our veterans, and that's wonderful and rightly so, right? But then we have these frontline American soldiers, kind of police officers from every race, from every religion, from every orientation, and men and women, and all of this, right? And they're going through combat every day on the streets. And, we as a country don't, in my opinion, do enough to celebrate just the sacrifice that the men and women in those professions, whether they're policing or firefighting or EMTs, first responders, what they do for us. We're quick to point out the controversies and the problems and the bad things that happen in those professions, right? Because that happens in any profession, including counseling. But this is a profession that really gets hit hard, and probably is kind of crying out for some help and someone to take note of that and to step in and assist. So anyway, thank you so much, just more or less, for your encouragement in that post, because your first couple sentences really motivated me, and I look forward to having a continuing dialogue around this. Thanks.